Hello there. This is going to be a shorter video than usual. As you might be able to hear, I have been losing my voice on and off this week, still in danger of losing it again, so I'm not going to wibble at you too much this time. In the last video, I talked about snippets and snippet rolls very briefly in terms of something that I do with my very small scraps. Here are a couple of examples. What I'm going to do in this video is talk you through how I made these on the sewing machine for the benefit of those of you who sew and who have a sewing machine. I'm then going to walk you through one method of doing a similar thing without a sewing machine, and I'll show you a few examples that I've made of what you can do with that. So these are my sewn examples. They consist of all manner of scraps, some of them quite plain, some of them have been painted on or drawn on. There's a few bits of book pages in there that have had some watercolour on them. There's some marker pen marks going on. All of these have been sewn onto a strip of paper torn off a book. So this is quite sturdy, good quality book page paper. Cartridge paper would work quite well. You do want something quite sturdy here. At a push you could use 2 layers of regular printer paper. And you may be able to see here that I've sewn 2 different lines in the course of making this. And my stitch length is a little shorter than you'd use for basting. So I think somewhere around 1/2 centimetre, a little over 1/4 of an inch, something like that is about the right stitch length for this. When you're sewing on paper, you have to remember that the closer the stitches are, the more you are weakening that piece of paper. What you don't want to do is to accidentally create a perforated line, which it could tear down very easily. So just be aware of that. You want something dense enough to firmly attach the pieces of paper. You want 4 or 5 stitches ideally on each scrap, but not too dense. And what I've done is I've run that strip of paper through my sewing machine very slowly, and as I've gone along, I've added at intervals my first layer of scraps. You can see that purple one is one of the first layer. We've got an orangey one there, an orangey one there, and a purple one at the end. So leaving quite large gaps. And then at the end, I have turned the paper around. I've switched to a zigzag stitch, and then as I've gone back down, I've added more pieces of paper from my pile to fill in those gaps and add to any areas I feel need a bit more colour or a bit more of a specific colour. So I've gone down one time, straight stitch, and I've come back the other time with zigzag stitch. Now, usually, those of you who sew a lot, we're very careful to go over our ends a couple of times to do a sort of locking stitch at either end. I don't like doing that on something this decorative, and you certainly don't need to worry about any sort of seam that might pull apart. So what I've done instead of that locking stitch, because I find it very hard to get it to look nice, I always think it looks a little bit clunky, a little bit ugly. What I've done instead is I've pulled all of my loose threads to the back and then I've taped them down. And on this other one, slightly differently, that end was not loose because that's where I turned the sewing machine around. This end, again, I've pulled all the threads to the back of the piece, neatly knotted them off all together, and then just trimmed off the excess there. So those are quite neat ways of finishing off something, finishing off your stitches when there's not going to be too much tension, too many forces operating on them. And the thread I used for this was this lovely Gooseman variegated thread, which I use quite a lot for quilting. I think it's called the Sulky range. It's a little bit thicker than standard sewing cotton, and it comes in a wonderful range of colours. I really like using this just to add a bit of a subtle change. Of course, you can use any kind of thread that you want, anything you've got lying around. So those are the sewn ones. Now let's see how you can achieve a similar effect even if you don't sew, you don't have a sewing machine, you do not currently feel like sewing this. I've put together a couple of piles of scraps. I've got a more neutral set here, sort of neutrals and a bit of orange mixed in, and here I've got all sorts of colours. As I generate these, I tend to put them in a tub, in a repurposed tub. Other brands of sandwich thread are available, but they all go in there, and then when that starts to get a bit full, or I feel like I like to put some strips together, I dig that out, bring out a smaller selection so I'm not working with the whole tub, I'm not getting a bit overwhelmed by the choice, and I'll spend 15-20 minutes just making a few snippet strips. And as well as my scraps, I'm going to be using some quite narrow washi tapes. The thickest I've got here is 1 centimetre, 10 millimetres. I've got some double-sided sticky tape, which again I think is 1 centimetre wide, and I've got some scissors. Now you can use thicker tape, thicker washi tape, and bigger strips. You can scale the whole operation up if you want, but I think this leads to a nice size of snippet to go into a small junk journal or art journal, or possibly go on the back of a strip of card to use as a bookmark. So this is the scale I like to work at, where the tape is around 1 centimetre thick. So I think I'm going to go with neutrals and then some brighter oranges for the one I'm making for you on film. There's a few bits of black in there as well. I'm just going to pull out a few bits which I think will work quite well together. Actually, maybe the black is a little bit too stark. Got quite a set of these book edges which got trimmed off some painting that I did, so I'm going to pull a few of those out. I'll go for ones without writing on or without much writing on. There we go, that should do it. Okay, and then from my other pile I'm going to pull out a few much brighter bits of orange and maybe try to get some yellow in there as well. So they're quite vibrant. That's quite a nice one. My bright yellow, some yellow and red. That's quite nice with the corner cut off there, but I am going to just tear that in half. It's a bit long. What else have we got then? You're really a neutral. You should be over there. Could stray into red, but actually that's quite fun. That's got a bit of green going on as well. I think you're another piece of that. And another one. You might not need those yellows in the end, actually. That's a good one. Another bit of that stripiness. Oh, and that's orange tending towards yellow there. Yeah, I think those very bright yellows can go back in again. Okay, all the rest of this can now disappear. Some of them will actually fully disappear, no doubt. So this is what I'm going to be using then. I'm going to get my strip of tape and I generally just eyeball this. You could measure it against a page that you're planning to use, but I think that's going to be a good length. Snip that off and lie it down on my crafting surface. Get the cat hair off it. Lie it down with, as you can probably tell, the sticky side up. Hooray! And then I'm going to alternate my strips. I'm going to hang that one off the edge ever so slightly. You can see it's just a few millimeters over the edge there. I'm going to stick a similar one down this end over here. We're not going to be particularly neat about this. Haphazard is what we're going for. And I put that one with the 42 on it in the middle. 42, of course, being a very important number. I'll put that one equidistant there. Good word, equidistant. And another one about along there. So those are our that's our first layer, that's our sort of anchor point sorted. And then go along and fill in those gaps a touch. And that's an interesting shape, that one. I might have that sort of framing 42 there. So I'm making sure that it's enough in contact with the tape that it's fairly well stuck down, but leaving a gap there for something else to come along. And that something else I think is going to be that. Set that across like that. I think that's nicely covering up a bit of that expansive orange and a bit of this lighter one. I'm going to put this yellowy bit down this end here. Okay, I've not left a gap for anything else, but that's okay. Let's try and put this interesting scrap that side of the 42 there, again leaving enough tape that I can stick something else down. That something else is going to be that thin strip there. Yep, that fits quite neatly. And then I've got one more, this here, I think, that way around, so we get the interesting edge across this slightly boring bit. Yeah, that's not bad. And let's get that there. And after all that, I think it would be quite nice to get that darker bit of orange over there. So I'm going to grab an extra bit of tape. I cheat ever so slightly, except that it's not cheating because I'm making up the rules myself. I'll stick an extra bit of tape to the back of that. Get that bit of tape off. I'm going to stick that down about, yeah, now that just about finishes that off, doesn't it? Okay. Now, we could leave that like that. I think it looks a little bit unfinished and a little bit too loose. And it may in fact be a little bit too loose. I think I'd like to reinforce these a little bit, especially if they're going to get bent and they're going to get manipulated a bit as you turn the pages. So what I'm going to do is put a strip of washi across the top of here, just to stick a few of those loose edges down, make it look more finished and add a little bit of security to it. So let's see, we've got quite a thin black spotty tape. That's quite an elegant look. Or we've got these flowers, which also have a little bit of yellow, a bit of red in them. I think I'm going to go with flowers in this case. So, not going to go over the ends, but just enough to cover each piece with something down the middle, leaving our 42 barely visible. It is, after all, the answer to life, the universe and everything. Only we knew the question. Snipped off the end there, and that's been the loose end on the roll, so I'm not going to trust that to stay stuck down. I'm just going to snip that bit off as well. So there we have, for future use, our snippet strip, which has still got the protective backing on the other side of the sticky back plastic there. So the double-sided tape, we can peel that off and use it whenever we want. And what I did with a previous one that I made was just stuck it down the side of this book page. You see, in this case I stuck it down immediately, so the tape has gone all the way over the page and over the other end again, and it just slightly overhangs the page. But then in our junk journal we've got bigger pages either side of it, so that's not going to stick out of the book as a whole, but it does make quite a nice interesting edge to go against our next page. So that's what I've used that one for. And you can make these quite elaborate in the end. So here's a very similar one that I've made with blues, purples and greens, with quite a nice washi tape with the sparkly stars on it there. I've made another one where I've done more of a gradient with some gold, and to emphasize that gold tape and make the colours pop a bit more, I've also drawn either side of the tape with some black marker. This is quite a plain one, but it's very good if you don't have a lot of coloured snippets, you don't have collage papers, you've not quite built up that stash yet. Then you can use, more cat hair. Then you can use bits of envelope. So these are little scraps from two different types of envelope with the different privacy markings on the back. There's a strip of a third type that I've stuck across the top. Instead of washi tape, I stuck a strip of tape to the back of that so I can stick it down. So that's quite a nice sort of neutral edge to a page. And similar to that, rather than using a strip of envelope with the tape stuck to the back, here everything has been finished off with a piece of slightly see-through fabric. Again, that has had some sticky back plastic stuck to one side and it's been stuck down. I've gone over that again with a very thin washi tape, and I've gone over the washi tape with a purple shiny acrylic marker. And these bits are bits of scrap paper that I got out of a set. And these are slightly longer, but they should all hold together. I don't think I'd put that too near the edge of a page. I wouldn't want that to overhang too much, but that will still be a very effective page edge. Or possibly a frill on a greetings card. I'm quite happy with that one as well. So those are my snippet strips made in 2 different ways, with and without a sewing machine, with and without washi tape, and I hope that has inspired you to do something quite exciting with your own little scraps. Thank you for watching. I will see you next time.